However, there was another chamber, a chamber that was situated deep below the ground. There were the walls and the thickest at the bottom. There was no windows, and with the air embankment around would not let out a cry of pain. Because it is down there in a dark, dank, evil corner of that very cellar where once upon a time the tower torture chamber was housed. And you can still go down there today if you wish. You can still descend down there into the dark, airless bowels of that very tower. But if you do, please be prepared, because even today, in enlightened times, you may still be tortured. Down there now is a gift shop. Now, access to that tower is up that temporary staircase there. But when you get in there, you will discover suits of armour, some of them owned by Henry VIII. The block and axe that was used in executions, the swords, spears, helmets. There's also the chapel of St. John the Evangelist, which is possibly the oldest Norman chapel in England. And the Line of Kings. It's all available for you in there. Down in the corner, and just beyond the trees, you'll find the entrance of the Bloody Tower. Now, it was there where Sir Walter Raleigh held a prisoner. Raleigh, that navigator and explorer. He was held there for 13 years of his life, during which time he fathered a son. And wrote a book, History of the World, Part 1. But he was executed on the orders of James I. Now, James not only hated Raleigh, but he also detested the habit that Raleigh had brought back to this country from the other side of the Atlantic. The habit that still afflicts many today. What would that be?
Smoking.
Yes, smoking. Line dancing and country and western. Now, on the day of his execution, Sir Walter Raleigh was taken from here to Old Palace Yard. Old Palace Yard is where the House of Parliament now stands. And the day of his execution actually coincided with the Lord Mayor's parade. Nobody went to see the Lord Mayor's parade that year. They all went to Westminster to watch Sir Walter Raleigh die. He was a very, very popular man. In fact, he gave a farewell speech on that scaffold site that lasted in excess of an hour and a half. He then composed himself ready to die, and he laid his head down upon the wooden block. But the crowd jumped up. No, 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 they cried, and they stopped the execution. And the reason for that was quite simple. Sir Walter Raleigh had put his head on, facing towards the west. And in those days, they believed firmly that if you were to pass into the kingdom of heaven, you had to die facing the east and the Holy Land. Annoyed at having his composure interrupted, Raleigh got up once more. He addressed the crowd again. He said, "It matters not where my head lies as long as my heart is in the right place." Turning to face east, he paused, and he felt the edge of the axe, and he said to the axeman, "That is a rough medicine, but a sharp cure for all ills." He then laid his head down upon that wooden block, and the executioner raised the axe high, and down it came, decapitating Sir Walter Raleigh. The executioner stooped, he picked up Raleigh's head and showed it to the crowd, but this time there was silence. So quickly he took the head and he stuffed it into a soft scarlet leather pouch. He drew the cords tight and he handed the pouch together with the head to Elizabeth, Sir Walter Raleigh's wife. What a nice touch. Now, Sir Walter Raleigh himself lies in a place of great honour, just up at the high altar in St. Margaret's Church. That's the little chapel just in front of Westminster Abbey. Now, nobody knows where his head is, but his heart is in the right place. Now, there's also there were the two boy princes in the tower to be lodged. The boy king, Edward V, his younger brother Richard, Duke of York. They've been brought here to the tower by their uncle and protector, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. A man that Shakespeare would later write about. Shakespeare claimed that Gloucester had a deformity in the body, a crouched back. But sightings of those two boy princes, one aged 12, the other 9, playing in and around that tower, suddenly ceased September 1483, and they were never, ever, ever seen alive again. Now, by tradition, they had been murdered in that lower chamber, either by suffocation with a pillow or stabbing with a dagger, and their broken bodies were then bundled down the stone steps at the dead of night, to be hidden in a secret spot on the south side of that central tower. And it was there that the bodies would remain concealed. They lay hidden there for 191 years. until at last, during the reign of Charles II, workmen who were working on a stairwell there would discover a wooden chair. Now at first they thought they'd found treasure, and they brushed away the soil and they broke open that aged lock. But there was no gold, no silver, no jewels, just the rotten skeletal remains of two small boys. So the king then ordered the remains of these two young princes be placed into an urn that had been stretched in his iron by Sir Christopher Wren, and they were then reburied in Westminster Abbey in a spot called Innocents' Corner, and there they remain to this very day. Of course, nobody knows who did that terrible deed. It is a mystery. Some people think it was the Duke of Buckingham. Some people have claimed that it was Henry Tudor, although most people believe it was the boy's own uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. He'd already declared himself the King of England before the two princes disappeared, King Richard III. But he would not be a popular king in England and reigned for barely 3 years. He then lost his crown and his life at the Battle of Bosworth Field. And for many, many years, nobody knew where he was buried. He was known as a monarch with no known grave. But his body would be discovered, languishing under a municipal car park in Leicester.
Received a new message
under the letter R. Richard. When they dug the body up, the skeleton they discovered below did in fact have a crouched back, just as Shakespeare had said, which really did upset the Richard III Society, I'll tell you. But DNA evidence is now concluded. The remains they found are, in fact, the missing king, King Richard III. But I think they knew where he was all along. I am convinced that they knew where Richard lay. Just think about it. Discovered under a municipal car park in Leicester, very close to where the battle was fought and resting under the letter R. Just by that road sign, caution, Pumpkin Road. Now, if you move further to the right there, you'll see that L-shaped Tudor building, Queen's House, and if you look below the scaffold in there, you will see that old Tudor timbers of Queen's House slowly reappear. It's in that house where the Constable of the Tower still lives today. And over history, famous prison house is held there. Now, the house before that was said to be built as a wedding prison for Anne Boleyn, but she never got to occupy it, was where Anne Boleyn was held. But this house here is where Queen Catherine Howard, his fifth wife, would be held before her execution. Other infamous prisons include Herr Rudolf Hess, deputy leader of Nazi Germany. He was held there for 4 days in May 1941, as was William Penn, founder of Pennsylvania. He was found there too because of his political writing, but he was released on the intervention of his father and the condition he leave this country. That's when he crossed the Atlantic, and later on he went on to form that colony he then named in honor of his father, Pennsylvania. The simple brick building next to him is number 5 at Tower Green, the home of the gentleman jailer. That is a house where the Lady Jane Grey was held a prisoner before her execution. Her young husband, Guildford, was held in this town here, behind that arched window. And in that chamber, he had sat and carved his wife's name on the wall twice. Now, there are many inscriptions on the wall of that tower, and some of them go back over 500 years. You may go in later and read them. Access to that tower is where the blue lamppost is there. But let's get to the business end. Here we are on Tower Green. This area here is known as Tower Green, and this modern sculpture here marks the site, the private execution site upon the green. It was in this area where the 6th private execution took place. There was one man, Robert Devereux, who was the 2nd Earl of Essex, and 5 women, 3 of those women queens of England. And the first to die there on the 19th of May 1536 was Queen Anne Boleyn. But not by block and axe. Her executioner came from St. Omer in France and carried with him his own weapon of execution, a long and heavy double-edged sword. It would be one powerful sweeping arc of death of a sword that was enough to decapitate a Queen of England. Yet Anne Boleyn never believed that she would face execution. She had not arranged a funeral. There was no coffin. She would be buried in an arrow chair, just a rough wooden box that was designed to hold arrows. Her maid would lay that broken body of a queen within that common chair. It was then taken from there and into that chapel where it was buried on the left-hand side of the altar in an unmarked traitor's grave and without a son. And lying next to her up by the altar is Henry VIII's fifth wife, Queen Catherine Howard. Now, while Boleyn was probably innocent of all those terrible charges levied against her, Queen Catherine Howard was as guilty as charged. She was a 19-year-old reckless young beauty when she married Henry, and by contrast, Henry was now well into his 50s. In fact, he'd lost that sporting physique. He'd suffered gout for several years. He was grumpy. He went to bed early. So what did she do on a Saturday night? She met a man called Thomas Culpeper and took him as her lover. But it was a doomed affair. It proved the downfall of them both. Culpeper, he was taken out and faced public execution, but she was transferred here to Hampton Court to await her fate. And it was the night before the execution, behind the walls of that very house, that she would spend the time at practice by walking towards the wooden block and placing her head upon it, so that the next morning upon this spot here, she could die with a dignity befitting her station in life. Before we go, I did promise to tell you about that man that had his head sewn back on, did I not?
Yes.
And once they'd executed this very tall and handsome young man, they realised they'd made a terrible, terrible administrative error. Because this man was the
Commander,
son
you
of
received
a king.
a new message in your private terminal.
The son of a king nonetheless. And they realised with the record that they didn't have a portrait of him. So realising the mistake, they sent someone running to the lift, run as fast as you can. They said, bring back the head. Bring the right one. The Surgeon Royal then stitched the head carefully back onto the body. He was fitted with a scarf to hide the scar, and then the famous portrait painter, Sir Godfrey Kneller, was brought to the Tower to paint that portrait. But he was given only 12 hours due to the weather conditions. But he only took 8. And the subject never moved a muscle. That portrait is now in the hands of a private collector, but those that have been lucky enough to see it often claim it is not very lifelike. Isn't that a terrible story? Now, ladies and gentlemen, when you haven't seen the Crown Jewels and Royal Regalia, they are on display in this building over here below that large golden top. There is a bit of a queue, but it's certainly worth the wait because, ladies, when you get in there, you will discover the world's